There is one question sitting at the center of the current geopolitical storm. Why did the United States attack Iran? On the surface, the answer seems simple. Iran is a hostile power. Iran threatens American forces. Iran supports armed groups across the region. Iran sits near one of the most important oil choke points on Earth. So when Washington launches strikes or escalates pressure, many people treat it as just another chapter in a long conflict between America and the Islamic Republic. But that explanation is too small. Iran is not just another country in the Middle East. If Iran is a pressure point in the global system, it sits at the intersection of energy, trade, religion, empire, debt, military power, and the future of the world economy. When conflict erupts around Iran, it does not stay local. It sends signals to Moscow, Beijing, Riyadh, Tel Aviv, Brussels, New Delhi, Tokyo, and Wall Street. That is why this story matters. A strike on Iran is never only about Iran. It is about who controls the flow of energy. It is about who controls the rules of global trade. It is about whether the US dollar remains the center of the financial system. It is about whether America can still enforce its will across the Middle East. And it is about whether the old world order is strong enough to survive the forces now pulling it apart. To understand this, we have to begin with geography. Iran sits beside the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the outside world. A major share of the world's oil and gas flows through or near this route. If that passage becomes unstable, the shock does not stop in the Gulf. It reaches American consumers, European industry, Asian factories, shipping markets, insurance markets, and global inflation. This is why Iran has always had leverage far beyond its economy. Iran does not need to match America ship for ship, plane for plane, or dollar for dollar. Its power comes from location, geography, and disruption. It sits close enough to the energy arteries of the world that even a limited conflict can make markets panic. For Washington, that is both a threat and an opportunity. It is a threat because Iran can disrupt one of the world's most important energy corridors. But it is also an opportunity because any major crisis around Iran reminds the world that America still has the military reach to shape events in the Gulf. It reminds allies that they still need American protection. It reminds rivals that the United States can still strike. And it reminds markets that when the world becomes dangerous, the old instinct is still to run toward the dollar. That is the first major layer of this story, geopolitics. The United States is not only looking at Iran in isolation. It is looking at Iran as part of a much larger Eurasian equation. Washington's deeper fear is that Iran, Russia, and China could move into a tighter strategic alignment. Russia brings energy, military depth, and nuclear power. China brings industrial capacity, infrastructure, finance, technology, and trade networks. Iran brings geography, influence in the Middle East, access to the Gulf, and pressure against America's regional architecture. If these powers coordinate more deeply, they could begin building a continental system that reduces dependence on American-controlled sea lanes, American finance, and American security guarantees. China has already spent years pushing infrastructure routes across Eurasia. Russia has been forced eastward by Western sanctions. Iran has every reason to look for partners outside the US-led order. For America, this is dangerous because the United States has always been strongest when it can prevent any rival bloc from dominating Eurasia. That has been the core logic of American grand strategy for generations. Keep Europe divided enough from Russia, keep Asia from consolidating under one power, keep the Middle East open to US influence, keep the sea lanes under American control, keep the dollar at the center of global trade, and make sure no rival coalition can become strong enough to bypass the system Washington built. Iran challenges that system because it is not merely a military adversary. It is a geographic bridge. It connects the Middle East to Central Asia. It sits between the Gulf and the Caspian region. It can link China's infrastructure ambitions, Russia's strategic interests, and regional anti-American forces. That is why Iran matters far beyond its GDP on a map. Iran is a hinge. And whoever controls the hinge has influence over the door. This is why a US strike on Iran sends a message much wider than Tehran. It tells China that its Eurasian corridor is vulnerable. It tells Russia that its southern strategy can be pressured. It tells the Gulf states that America still has the ability to escalate. It tells Europe that energy security still depends on US power. And it tells the world that the Middle East remains a theater where Washington can still act with force. But geopolitics is only one part of the picture. The second layer is financial. The United States is carrying a massive debt burden. The American system depends on global confidence in US Treasury bonds, the dollar, and American financial markets. As long as the world believes the dollar is the safest place to go in times of crisis, the system can continue. But if major powers begin trading around the dollar, holding fewer treasuries, or building parallel institutions, the foundation of American power begins to weaken. This is where energy and finance meet. Oil is not just a commodity, it is part of the global dollar system. For decades, energy trade, dollar liquidity, US debt markets, and American military power have reinforced each other. The US Navy protects trade routes, Gulf energy flows through the world economy, the dollar remains central, surplus capital returns to American markets, Washington borrows, spends, deploys, and maintains its global role. If that cycle weakens, America's power becomes more expensive to maintain. So when a crisis erupts around Iran, the financial implications are enormous. Investors may move into dollars, governments may seek safety in US assets, energy importers may become more dependent on American security guarantees. Countries considering a move away from the dollar may suddenly reconsider the risks. This does not mean every military decision is made only for financial reasons. But it does mean finance is always present in the background. Modern empire does not run only on aircraft carriers and missiles. It runs on credit, debt, currencies, bond markets, banking systems, sanctions, and the ability to define what counts as safe in a dangerous world. That is why Iran is so important. A conflict with Iran can shake energy markets can shake inflation can shake central banks can shake debt markets can shake governments. And through all of that, the question remains, where does the world run when it is afraid? For the United States, the answer must remain the dollar. If the answer ever becomes something else, the American-led order enters a much more dangerous phase. But there is another layer beneath this, the internal condition of the American empire itself. When great powers are confident, stable, and economically healthy, they can often absorb challenges without overreacting. But when an empire feels pressure from within, foreign policy can become more aggressive, more symbolic, and more erratic. America today faces multiple internal strains at once. Debt is rising, political trust is declining, institutions are losing credibility, the middle class feels squeezed, young people are more pessimistic about the future. The country is deeply polarized, immigration has become a cultural battlefield, the economy looks strong on paper, but many ordinary people feel that the system no longer works for them. At the same time, elite competition is intensifying. Different factions inside the American system are fighting over the future. Nationalist conservatives, liberal internationalists, defense hawks, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the energy sector, the intelligence world, populist movements, religious movements, and the permanent bureaucracy. Each faction has its own vision of what America should be, who the enemy is, and how power should be used. When internal competition becomes too intense, empires often project their conflicts outward. A foreign enemy can temporarily simplify the domestic picture. It gives politicians a clear target, it gives media a dramatic story, it gives the military a mission, it gives the public a sense that chaos has a cause. And it allows leaders to frame internal weakness as external threat. If Iran fits that role perfectly, it is already demonized in American political culture. It has a history of conflict with the United States. It is tied to armed groups across the region. It is hostile to Israel. It challenges US allies in the Gulf. And it is powerful enough to be portrayed as dangerous, but not so powerful that Washington must treat it like China or Russia. That makes Iran an ideal pressure valve. When the American system is under stress, Iran becomes a place where Washington can demonstrate strength. It becomes a stage where the empire can still perform the role of empire. But that performance is risky because Iran is not isolated from the rest of the world. It is connected to Russia, China, the Gulf, Israel, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, global energy, and financial markets. A limited strike can become a regional crisis. A regional crisis can become an economic shock. An economic shock can become a political crisis, and a political crisis can force even more escalation. This is how empires get trapped. They act to prove they are still in control, but the act itself reveals how fragile control has become. Then there is the Middle East itself. No region in the world carries the same combination of strategic and symbolic weight. The Middle East is not only a place of oil fields, military bases, and shipping lanes. It is also the birthplace of major religions, ancient empires, sacred cities, and stories that still shape the imagination of billions of people. Jerusalem, Babylon, Persia, Egypt, Arabia, the Levant, these are not ordinary names. They carry historical memory, they carry religious emotion, they carry imperial ambition, they carry trauma. This is why wars in the Middle East often become larger than themselves. A border clash becomes a civilizational conflict, a strike on a military facility becomes a test of divine destiny. A political dispute becomes a religious prophecy, a regional conflict becomes a story about the end of an age. That does not mean every leader is literally making decisions based on prophecy. But it does mean the symbolic environment matters. People do not fight only over land and resources. They fight over stories. They fight over identity. They fight over memory. They fight over what they believe history is supposed to become. In the Middle East, geopolitics and mythology have always lived side by side. The land between Egypt, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, Persia, and the Mediterranean has been contested for thousands of years. Empires have marched through it again and again because it is a bridge between continents and civilizations. Whoever controls the Levant gains influence over roots, trade, legitimacy, and sacred geography. This is why the region produces such intense political emotion. For Israel, security is tied to survival, memory, and ancient identity. For Iran, resistance is tied to sovereignty, revolution, religion, and regional status. For the United States, the Middle East is tied to energy, alliances, military credibility, and global leadership. For Russia and China, it is tied to the weakening of American dominance. For the Gulf states, it is tied to regime survival and balancing between great powers. Every actor is playing a different game on the same board. That is what makes the region so dangerous. When a crisis begins, every side sees something different. Washington sees deterrence, Tehran sees regime survival, Israel sees existential threat, Moscow sees opportunity, Beijing sees energy risk, the Gulf sees instability, markets see oil prices, religious movements see prophecy, nationalists see humiliation or revenge. The same event becomes many stories at once, and when that happens, escalation becomes harder to control. The original script also points toward another idea. Belief itself is a form of power. This part needs to be handled carefully, but the underlying insight is useful. Politics is not driven only by material interests. It is also driven by imagination. People need stories to act. Nations need myths. Empires need missions. Financial systems need confidence. Technologies need belief. Armies need narratives. Markets need trust. A government can print money, but the money only works if people believe it has value. A state can issue debt, but the debt only works if investors believe it will be repaid. A leader can declare a war, but the war only works politically if the public believes there is a reason. A technology company can sell the future, but the future only arrives if people believe the technology is inevitable. This is why control over belief is one of the deepest forms of power. The modern world often pretends to be rational, but it still runs on faith. Faith in currency, faith in institutions, faith in national identity, faith in markets, faith in science, faith in technology, faith in leaders, faith in the idea that tomorrow will still make sense. When that faith begins to collapse, systems become unstable. And that brings us to the final layer, the transition from money to data. For most of the modern era, money has been the supreme organizing force. Money directs labor, money directs attention, money determines what gets built, who gets hired, what gets destroyed, what gets protected, and what gets ignored. If someone wants your time, they pay you. If a government wants a war, it funds one. If a corporation wants your attention, it buys ads. If a bank wants influence, it controls credit. If a state wants compliance, it can use sanctions, markets, taxes, or access to financial systems. Money has been the operating system of modern power. But now a new operating system is emerging. Data allows power to move beyond the control of labor and into the control of behavior. Financial system can influence what you do by rewarding or punishing you economically. But a data system can influence what you want before you even act. That is a much deeper form of power. Artificial intelligence does not need to be magical to be politically significant. It does not need to be conscious. It does not need to be alive. It only needs access to enough data, enough computing power, and enough integration into daily life to shape decisions at scale. If an AI system knows what people watch, buy, fear, desire, search, believe, and emotionally respond to, it can become a tool of prediction and influence. It can guide advertising, politics, policing, finance, education, healthcare, entertainment, and war. In the old system, power asks, how do we control resources? In the new system, power asks, how do we control attention? Because attention is upstream from action. If you control what people see, you influence what they think. If you influence what they think, you influence what they want. If you influence what they want, you influence what they choose. And if you influence what they choose while making them feel free, you have built the most efficient form of control. This is why AI matters to geopolitics. The struggle between America and China is not only about chips, missiles, or trade deficits. It is also about who builds the technological infrastructure of the next world order. Who controls the cloud? Who controls semiconductors? Who controls platforms? Who controls data flows? Who controls digital payments? Who controls surveillance systems? Who controls the algorithms that shape public opinion? Iran may seem separate from this technological struggle, but it is not. The same global order that protects the dollar also protects America's technological dominance. The same military system that secures energy routes also secures the geopolitical environment in which American technology firms operate. The same sanctions system that targets Iran also reveals how finance, software, chips, banking, and military power now operate as one integrated machine. That is the real story of modern power, military force, financial control, technological infrastructure, and narrative management are merging. A country can be attacked with missiles, it can be isolated through sanctions, it can be removed from payment systems, its leaders can be targeted with information campaigns. Its population can be influenced through digital platforms. Its economy can be strangled through export controls. Its alliances can be disrupted through energy pressure. Its future can be shaped without ever declaring total war. This is the world Iran is living in, and this is the world America is trying to manage. But the danger for Washington is that every use of power also teaches the rest of the world how the system works. Every sanction teaches countries to seek alternatives. Every asset freeze teaches governments to diversify reserves. Every military strike teaches rivals to harden defenses. Every information campaign teaches others to build their own platforms. Every attempt to control the system motivates someone else to build a parallel one. That is the paradox of empire. The more aggressively it uses its tools, the more urgently others search for escape routes. This is why Russia, China, Iran, and other states are increasingly interested in alternatives. Alternative payment systems, alternative trade routes, alternative energy deals, alternative security structures, alternative media ecosystems, and alternative technological stacks. They may not fully trust each other, they may not form a perfect alliance, their interests often clash, but they share one thing: they do not want the United States to have absolute control over the rules of the game. That is enough to bring them closer, and that is enough to worry Washington. So when the United States strikes Iran, we have to see the action inside this larger historical moment. America is trying to preserve a system built after World War II and expanded after the Cold War. That system depends on military reach, dollar dominance, alliance networks, control of sea lanes, technological superiority, and the belief that the United States remains the central power in global affairs. But that system is now under strain from every direction. China is rising, Russia is disruptive, Iran is resistant, the Gulf states are hedging, Europe is uncertain, the global south is less obedient, American debt is growing, domestic politics are fractured, trust in institutions is weaker, and new technologies are changing the nature of power itself. In that environment, Iran becomes more than a target. If Iran becomes a test, can America still deter its enemies? Can it still reassure its allies? Can it still dominate the Gulf? Can it still protect the dollar system? Can it still prevent a rival Eurasian bloc from forming? Can it still control escalation? Can it still act like the indispensable power? Those are the real questions behind the strike. And the answers are not obvious because every American action now carries higher risk than before. The strike may show strength, but it may also push Iran closer to Russia and China. Sanctions may weaken Iran, but they may also encourage alternatives to the dollar. Military escalation may reassure allies, but it may also expose how dependent those allies are on American power. A crisis may drive money into U.S. assets, but it may also remind the world how unstable the system has become. This is why the situation is so dangerous. The old tools still work, but they do not work as cleanly as they used to. America can still strike, but striking does not automatically produce obedience. America can still sanction, but sanctions do not automatically produce surrender. America can still lead alliances, but allies now hedge. America can still defend the dollar, but rivals now look for alternatives. America can still dominate narratives, but trust in official narratives is weaker than it used to be. That is what imperial decline looks like. It does not mean collapse happens overnight. It does not mean America is suddenly weak. The United States remains the most powerful country in the world in many ways. It has unmatched military reach, deep financial markets, world-class technology firms, powerful intelligence networks, and alliances across the globe. But decline does not begin when power disappears. Decline begins when power becomes more expensive to use, harder to justify, and less effective than before. That is the phase we are watching, and Iran is one of the places where this becomes visible. If the conflict remains limited, Washington may claim it restored deterrence. If Iran backs down, the U.S. can present the strike as proof of strength. If allies rally, the old system gets another temporary boost. But if Iran escalates, if energy markets panic, if Russia and China deepen support, if the Gulf becomes unstable, if global anger rises, or if the crisis exposes limits in American power, then the strike could become another example of an empire creating the very problem it was trying to prevent. That is the central tension. America is acting to preserve order, but the act of preservation may accelerate disorder. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than Iran. The world is entering a period where multiple systems are losing balance at the same time. The financial system is overloaded with debt. The geopolitical system is shifting toward multipolar competition. The technological system is moving toward AI-driven control. The social system is strained by inequality and distrust. The energy system remains vulnerable to choke points. And the ideological system is fragmenting into competing visions of the future. When one system becomes unstable, the world can manage it. When all of them become unstable at once, every crisis becomes more explosive. That is why a conflict with Iran matters so much. It is not just about missiles, oil, or regional proxies. It is a window into the deeper instability of the global order. It shows how energy, finance, empire, religion, technology, and identity are now tied together. A military strike can move markets, a market shock can shift politics, a political crisis can fuel nationalism. Nationalism can justify more conflict. Conflict can accelerate surveillance. Surveillance can strengthen AI systems. AI systems can reshape public opinion. Public opinion can determine whether leaders escalate or retreat. Everything is connected. That is the uncomfortable reality of the moment. So why did the United States attack Iran? Because Iran sits at the crossroads of the world's most important tensions. It threatens America's regional order. It complicates the security of Israel and the Gulf. It has the ability to disrupt energy flows. It is a potential partner in a Russia-China-Iran axis. It challenges the credibility of American deterrence. It sits near the heart of the dollar energy system. And it offers Washington a stage on which to demonstrate power at a time when American power is being questioned. But the deeper answer is this. The strike is not only about what Iran has done. It is about what Iran represents. Iran represents the possibility of a world where America can no longer dictate outcomes alone. A world where rivals coordinate, a world where energy routes are contested, a world where the dollar faces alternatives, a world where military force no longer guarantees political success. A world where old empires must fight harder to maintain the illusion of control. That is why this conflict feels larger than a normal regional crisis. Because it is larger, it is part of the struggle over the next global order. The United States wants to preserve the old system. China wants to build around it. Russia wants to break parts of it. Iran wants to survive outside it. The Gulf wants to profit from all sides. Israel wants security in a region where every shift feels existential. Europe wants stability but lacks strategic independence. And the rest of the world is watching, waiting, hedging, and preparing for whatever comes next. The most dangerous thing now is not simply that America struck Iran. The most dangerous thing is that the forces behind the strike are still moving. The debt problem has not gone away. The dollar system still needs confidence. The energy choke points are still vulnerable. The Middle East is still unstable. Israel and Iran are still locked in confrontation. Russia and China are still looking for ways to weaken American dominance. AI is still transforming power, and American domestic politics are still deeply divided. In other words, the pressure has not been released. It has only been redirected, and that means the next crisis may come faster than expected. It may come through the Strait of Hormuz, it may come through oil prices, it may come through a cyber attack, it may come through a proxy war, it may come through a financial shock, it may come through an Israeli-Iranian escalation, it may come through a US political crisis, or it may come through a technological system that gives states and corporations more power over human behavior than ever before. Whatever form it takes, the pattern is clear. The world is not moving toward calm. It is moving toward compression. Too many rivalries, too many debts, too many fears, too many technologies, and too many historical wounds are being squeezed into the same moment. Iran is where we can see that compression clearly. That is why this story deserves attention, because if we only look at the bombs, we miss the system behind them. If we only look at the headlines, we miss the historical forces underneath. If we only ask who fired first, we miss the bigger question, why has the world become so unstable that a strike on Iran can feel like a preview of something much larger? That is the real issue. Iran is the battlefield we can see, but the real conflict is over the future architecture of power itself. Who controls energy? Who controls money? Who controls data? Who controls the story? Who controls the technology that shapes human behavior? And who gets to decide what the next world order looks like? Until those questions are answered, Iran will not be the final crisis. It will be one chapter in a much longer struggle, a struggle between land power and sea power, between dollar power and alternative systems, between old empire and emerging blocks, between human choice and algorithmic control, between national sovereignty and global management, between the world that existed after World War II and the world now trying to be born. And that is why the US attack on Iran matters, not because it explains everything by itself, but because it reveals everything that is already breaking.